meeting is being recorded.
Where's Garrett?
Nothing like the Northwest, but the trouble is we're generalizing that the Northwest is great compared to the rest. And Garrett doesn't like generalizations. We shouldn't stereotype other states.
Uh-oh.
The only generalization is that it's generally unsafe to generalize.
Well,
The generalization I like.
But you and I are generalizing how great the Northwest is.
I know, but that's just because it's objectively great. Oh, wait.
Exactly.
Well, I tell people
the
that Northwest is the land of beautiful scenery and boring weather, and I came from Kansas where just the opposite. So,
not to generalize, but that's true.
Yeah, no, the Northwest is very beautiful. Like, I loved redwood forests. I mean, those are gorgeous and they smell great, and like they're gorgeous. So
and the rain in the mist enshrouded islands of San Juan and the islands between Vancouver Island and Seattle.
but all the ferry boats and that's
the
an
ferry
exciting lifestyle up here. Yeah.
Oh man, but we shouldn't generalize how great it is. Not in this meeting anyway.
Well, generalizations actually are okay. Stereotypes, I'll go into the definition. There's a particular part of stereotypes that makes it bad. I actually tried to come up with I thought that some stereotypes were safe when I started preparing for tonight's presentation. And it turns out they're not, I don't think, but I'll allow the audience to try to prove me wrong, which is totally fine if they do, and I'll just change my mind. But I think that in general, stereotypes are not good.
What about medical stereotypes? For instance, dosages are different depending on race for some drugs.
So that's not so we'll go into the definition of stereotype. That's not actually a definition of a stereotype. That doesn't meet the definition that I looked up anyway. Hey, Katie, how are you?
Good. I wanted to give you a compliment. This is usually a touchy issue for me, but I'm willing to listen to your opinion on it because I feel like I can learn something.
Thank you. I'm really honored that you would say that. It is a touchy subject in general. And you may have noticed, Katie, I do not steer away from touchy subjects. I go head first into them, but try to do it politely. And I think we've managed to talk about some of the most incendiary subjects known to man in these events with large groups of people. And we've had very little need for moderating. And when we moderate even a little bit, the problem gets resolved. And so I've been I think that's one of the things I'm the proudest of having, accomplished since starting the FTI is that we've had polite conversations about even the most divisive of issues during the most divisive time that I've ever lived in. And probably the most divisive time, in my opinion, since the Civil War, to be honest. But I don't know if there's been anything since then that was quite as divisive as what we're going through today. But at least in the US, I'm more knowledgeable of US politics than about international, although I try to learn a little bit about it as much as I can. But anyway, it's social time, so I would love to hear from people and what brings you to where you're coming from and what brings you to tonight's topic. And I'm going to make Michael a moderator, and if Will's here, I'll make him a moderator. But yeah, I would love to hear from people.
It's Garrett, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Derek. I may be the only non-American here.
No, I think
no, there's other non-Americans here. There's Australian, there's Canadian.
There's what?
Australian, Canadian.
Yeah, okay. I'm a Canadian Irish guy. Anyway,
Canadian Irish. Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So I have maybe a little different perspective and experience on the question than maybe somebody who grew up in Chicago or Los Angeles or that kind of thing, because the history of the country is different. But lately, in the last year or so, I've been doing a lot of reading on the subject of racism. I've come across some really interesting
Oh,
publications. There's actually one I came across a few months ago that is Racisms. It's a book by Francisco Bethencourt and Princeton University Press, 2015. Racisms from the Crusades to the 20th century. So he has an interesting, he's analyzed it in a way that not many have, or maybe no one else. He's, we're just going to bring it up here as to what, just to highlight it in a minute. Here we go. Yeah, just reading a review on it. Anyway, he shows that racism preceded any theories of race and must be viewed within the prism and context of social hierarchies and local conditions. And anyway, he argues that in various aspects, all racism has been triggered by political projects monopolizing specific economic and social resources. So he has a kind of a global, long history perspective in the book. The book is a bit of a tome. I took it out and I read the first, I guess the first 10% of the book and the last 10% because I didn't have a lot of time, but it's worth a good read. It's a good read. It's got an interesting historical perspective. So it doesn't just, it gets you out of the experience of racism in the United States or in Canada for that matter, and looks at it from long-term history.
What's the name of the book again?
Racisms, plural. And the author is Francisco Bethencourt, Bethencourt. You can actually get it in paperback for about $25-30 now off of Amazon.
Do you mind rereading the first part you said about it? Thanks.
Oh, you mean the part that I was in summarizing the book?
Yes.
That part? Yeah, it's his argument is that racism preceded any theories of race and must be viewed within the prism and context of social hierarchies and local conditions. He argues that in various aspects, all racism has been triggered by political projects monopolizing specific economic and social resources. He looks at different forms of racism, this part I didn't mention before, and explores instances of enslavement, forced migration, and ethnic cleansing, while analyzing how practices of discrimination and segregation were defended. So the point is, it's not unique to the United States. It's got a long history, but its manifestations and form vary from place to place for different reasons, different social hierarchies, different times in history. But I guess knowing that it could be helpful in dismantling racism where we see it. But I'm not making that argument. That's the reason I read the book. I thought it might have something useful in that regard, and I've got to read it more thoroughly. But it's the only book I found where somebody in an academic context has actually analyzed it and presented it from that perspective, from the Crusades to the 20th century.
Yeah, it sounds like a great historical account of racism, and I was going to joke, but wait, history started in 1776, according to the U.S. Constitution. There was no history before that. No, I'm obviously so. Of course, racism existed before the U.S. existed, and in all parts of the world.
There's some people that think that slavery was invented in the United States. And
no.
There's another author I read
considered slavery normal.
Well, actually, there's another book on the history of slavery, and it's written by Junius Rodriguez, and that's a long book.
Native Americans had
chronology of slavery, and it goes back about 6800 BC to the present. Yeah, people need to
go back further than that.
People have to understand where the word slavery came from. The part Slav comes from Eastern Europe.
Derek, I do want to let other people introduce themselves. We're just in the social portion of the evening, so we usually do give short introductions for each person. But I appreciate your introducing the book. Does anyone else want to introduce themselves and sort of what brings you to where you're dialing in from and what brings you to tonight's topic?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Yeah, hi. You're in two different feeds, one from New York, one from Toronto. I'm not even sure which feed I'm on, but I'm here, you're there. I'm enjoying it, and I'm glad I'm with the Canadians. I'm from, I live near Buffalo in Toronto. So I love Canada. I go back and forth through there periodically. Anyway, I read a book a couple years ago about viewing this chaos from the caste system. There's a lot of similarities that further complicate or elucidate depending on how one uses it and weathers the or navigates that thought pattern. So that's my opening remarks. I've been here a couple times before. I'm glad to be back. I miss Canada. It's been a while since I've been there. I've been Victoria, Vancouver, beautiful islands, beautiful bay, Toronto, of course, Montreal, New Brunswick. So I grew up with you. I'm just south of the border over Lake Ontario.
Cool.
Brian, you mentioned Cass. Did you have experience in India?
No, but I read a book.
Oh, I see.
I don't recall her name. She received a lot of play. This is about 3-4 years ago, but she used the caste paradigm to look at racism and all classes and whatever caste can or can't cover. I'm sure it manifests itself differently in different parts of the country and among different castes. And I suspect there's a lot of similarities between caste and racism and stereotypes. So in a sense, stepping over each other.
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
you know, caste probably aligns more closely with stereotypes than racism, but maybe both. But Dr. B has their hand up, so why don't we let them go next, and in about 2 minutes we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you, sir. The book he's referring to is Isabel Wilkerson, and the name of the book is Caste. And it is a comparison about the caste system in India. It's a comparison with the Nazism and the caste as it was interpreted by them in the Nazi Germany. And of course, it also connects with slavery. So I'm glad that Brian brought it up. And I have read that book. It's quite an eye-opener. It did create a lot of controversy. The controversy continues. And the topic that they're talking about is critical race theory. And then back to you, Garrett.
Yeah, Cass, Dr. B, that Cass book, who's the author?
Isabel Wilkerson.
If you don't mind typing it into the chat just so people have it, that'd be great, Dr. B.
I could put that other book in there too, I guess. But yeah, I did want to mention that Bethencourt does deal with the caste system in his book. And it's considered a form of racism in his book.
And I'll put the Bethencourt one in because I looked it up. So anyone else want to give a quick introduction before we start on the presentation?
Oh, I'll go.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Okay. My name is Michael Strasberg. I live in New Jersey. I come to these just about every week, unless there's some compelling reason that I can't. I learn a lot. I enjoy everything I hear. I'm a member of the Freethinker Institute for quite a while now. I go to the Sunday meetings and we share a lot. We learn a lot. We're very supportive. And all of this is really enriching me, and I'm looking forward to learning more this evening.
I'm hoping that we have, it sounds like, well, I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm hoping that we get a diversity of opinions tonight and that we're not all of the same opinion. And I particularly want to give, I'm going to be asking questions for people who disagree with the argument that I'm presenting, because I think it's important to give people a voice that because I'm going to present a perspective that I think I can rationally justify, but I really want to hear perspectives that disagree with me, because that's where we learn the most, is from listening to people who disagree with us. And so I will sort of point out that I'm going to be looking for that, and hope that people will be willing to speak up, sharing opinions. And let me okay, so that said, I'm gonna give a quick introduction for myself. I'm Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor. By the way, I have 3 monitors, so I'll be looking in different directions. So if I'm not giving you eye contact, that's why. I'm now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, is what I call it. Probably positive psychology is the right current academic term for what I like to focus on. And I'm also the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We really focus on trying to help people be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, open to the public, and we cover a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry, at least not broadly. And then we have weekly members events that Michael alluded to, where we try to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives, and we get to know a small group of people in a really deep level, create a new friend network. And we have only one rule in the FTI, friend network of 10 or fewer people, so that we can get to know each other well. And then we have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. Tonight's topic is very divisive, and I hope we'll get a diversity of opinions, because that, like I said, is where we learn the most. And I want to make sure everybody is respected in sharing their opinions. Intention number 2, I mentioned intention number 1, to be the best version of ourselves, seek truth and be fair. Intention number 2 is to transparently share our beliefs with other people to the extent we trust them. I hope people will feel that this is a safe place to share whatever opinions they want, as long as they do it politely. And then part of intention number 2 is to listen with an open mind to everybody, including and especially those people we disagree with. We call that listening to understand, where we try to listen to people that disagree with us particularly, and understand where they're coming from and how they came about having their beliefs. And the more that we have trouble fathoming how someone came to that opinion, the more important it is we understand how they got there. And so basically that's everything I wanted to say in the intro. And I think Michael has a quick we're gonna save questions. There will be a few places in today's presentation where I'll actually prompt for people who have exceptions to the things that I'm presenting. Normally we don't take questions during the presentation portion, but I think tonight is a good reason to have an exception. And the presentation portion is pretty short, so, and it's not like there's a long argument that people need to be able to follow, which we have a lot of evenings. And so I think I'll have a bite-sized chunk of presentations content, and then I'll ask for does anyone see a reason to disagree with this? And that's where I'll be listening with an open mind to people who have a different perspective. So and hopefully everybody can listen with an open mind then. So with that said, Michael, did I miss anything, or did I cover what you normally cover?
No, you explained how this would be different from other approaches in the past.
Cool. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now, and let me put my video up so that I can see people. And so we're going to talk about racism and stereotypes. I was encouraged to cover both because racism is not as divisive as it once was, but stereotypes are still commonly held. And I'm not going to give a historical account of either one of these things. I'm going to talk about, and in fact, this is a good time for the agenda. Very short agenda. Skip the Freethinker Institute intro. I already did that. But I'm going to talk about the 2 definitions of racism. Yes, there's more than one, and I would argue one is more defensible than the other, but I'm going to give both. I'll talk about evaluating the veracity of each one, and we'll do definition 1 and evaluate veracity, and then definition 2 evaluate veracity. And then we'll talk about stereotypes and the definition of what a stereotype is, and talk about whether or not there are any situations where stereotypes are justifiable. I'm pretty good at finding loopholes, and I haven't found one to my perspective there yet. But again, I'm very open to people explaining things that I don't know yet. So that said, I'm going to talk about definition number 1 of racism, and it's really summarized as prejudice with power. I met a guy that was an ethnic studies major who introduced me to this in college. I graduated in the early aughts, and so this was a long time ago, but I still remember what this guy told me because it baffled my mind. He said, racism is prejudice with power, and minorities don't have power, and therefore minorities by definition cannot be racist no matter what their beliefs, no matter what they say or do. It's never racism because minorities don't have power. And so I will share the slide notes after this, and I have a reference from a modern psychology publication that's basically using the same definition, that racism is prejudice with power. Whether they interpret it the same way that he did, I assume that he got what he was saying from his ethnic studies class, because I don't know. I took an ethnic studies class in college and they did not teach that. So not all Cornell ethnic studies classes taught that, but his apparently did, or he just came to that conclusion of his own free will. I didn't ask that. Oh no, I think I did ask that. Because I was baffled. I was like, wait, is this what they're teaching you in class? And he was like, yeah, this is it. And so I guess what that would mean is, in a society where there's a majority who holds the majority of power, and mind you, that means that if there's a strong majority, even if elected representatives in a democracy are representative of the population, the majority would probably hold the majority of power. If there's a strong majority of one population, no matter what population that is, that would mean that all the minorities in that culture, basically can't be, could basically say, if I got into a position of power where I had the power to do it, like say they got some ultra powerful weapon and they suddenly were in power, they could basically enslave, in the most extreme example, like enslave the majority and say, well, you guys are, I'm not being racist, I'm just doing what I have the power to do, and now they have the power, so now they would be racist. But theoretically, doing that wouldn't be racist when they were not in a position of power. And basically any kind of hate or anger towards the majority would be justifiable by the minority. Let's take more realistic examples where a minority may have anger, hatred, or resentment towards a majority, and they can basically justify that and say, I hate the majority of this population because they have power, and they're therefore horrible people, or whatever they want to say. And they could justify fighting dirty against the majority and say that's okay too, like being very unethical, lying, cheating, stealing, potentially committing crimes if they could get away with them. Basically ethics is out the window if you think that that there's no such thing as racism. You could potentially justify actions like that where you're basically saying it's not racist. Now you could still say that those things are unethical, so a logical approach would still hold that doing any of those things is unethical. So I guess I'm gonna declare myself having because I just taught critical thinking skills. I just committed. Does anyone know what fallacy? Who was paying attention in fallacies? Slippery slope fallacy, right? I'm saying, basically that the minority can accuse the majority of, can justify hating the majority and not being racist for hating them, that's true, they can justify not being racist, but it's a slippery slope fallacy to say that they would then justify being unethical. So actually, I stand corrected on half of my slide. Any of the unethical stuff is not justifiable, but the minority could justify, disliking or, holding a negative opinion of the majority, and saying that they're not racist, even if they dislike people because of their race, by this definition. So I would argue that this definition doesn't make sense to me. Like, at the end of the day, if you're judging someone based on their race and you judge them in either a good or a bad light, that is racism. Like, judging someone as good or bad based on race, to me, is a distinction of, positive or negative attributes based on race, and that's racism. And so I'm curious if anyone believes this definition makes sense and can logically justify it in a way that I haven't thought of yet. Just go ahead and raise your hand if you can. Yeah, Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, it's a definition. So if that is what some people call racism, that's the definition. I learned that definition a year ago, and I was very surprised that it includes the provision that the group exercising the prejudice has to have power. And I checked the dictionary definition of racism, and racism it's meant to prejudice exercise from a dominant group towards another group based on race. So I was thinking what other words can be used. Prejudice is when there is no this dominated disjunctive, what other words one can use. I'm waiting to see what do you say about stereotyping, because it's a nice word. But this is a definition. That's the meaning of the English word racism. It has the inclusion of the power differential between the groups.
So this is one definition that I heard and that I was able to validate still exists, but it's actually not the dictionary definition. When I looked it up in dictionary.com, they have a very different definition that I'll go into in the next slide. But I want to kind of remind people two things. One, when you raise your hand, to just limit it to 2 or 3 minutes. I forgot to say that because when people speak, I want to give everyone a chance to speak, and there's a lot of hands up. And two, like in the presentation portion, I'm specifically looking for people who can actively support the thing that I don't think is justifiable with a reason it's justifiable. Everybody will have a chance to talk. My presentation portion is probably less than half an hour, including questions, is my guess, if we keep questions to just that. And we'll have plenty of time to talk and have everyone be able to share their opinions. But I really just want only people who can rationally justify this definition of racism and think that it's a good definition to use, and that it's an ethical definition to use, or that there's that it makes sense, if that makes sense. So for those with your hands up, if you can't justify this definition as being a good one to use, please take your hand down for now. And I don't want to pronounce your name and get it wrong. Nari?
Yeah. I'm not sure, but if my definition is going to support, your definition. But what jumped out at me, it was like Africa, for example. Yeah, people with guns and military can go overtake the majority, the government, as you said in your definition there. And then you went on reading about the minority. If they are a smaller group, then they really don't have the power to overcome like the mass that's in power. But my argument in that is maybe cannot underestimate them, because some of them are educated and they mobilize. And we have seen in politically, they've gotten very political, and they can swing elections too. And so the people in power, speaking in this century, they look at them and as good assets. So those are my two argument for your arguments.
Yeah, and I did point out that there's a flaw in my slide. So I pointed it out as I was presenting it. I realized I made a mistake, and so I corrected myself. But all I would say is that if the minority does have the power to influence, then the with power caveat is not relevant, because then they do have the power to influence, and therefore they're not immune from being racist. And if they don't have the power to influence, or if they perceive themselves as not having power, even if they actually do, I think your point is well taken, that, in many cases, minorities do have a lot of power and a lot of influence in the modern world. And I think that's great, to be honest. Like, I think everybody should have a voice. What I'm looking for in hands up is people that think that racism should only be called prejudice with power, meaning if someone is not in a position of power, but they hate other people because of their race, that person should not be called racist. If anyone can defend that, then raise your hand. If I get one more comment that doesn't defend that, I'm going to stop taking questions until the end of the presentation. So, Dr. B or Mike, are either of you trying to defend that racism should be defined as prejudice with power, and that if someone perceives themselves as not being powerful, that they therefore cannot be racist no matter what their beliefs are?
My answer to that, Gary, is very simple. 2 words. One is racism is prejudice. Racism is also favoritism. Second, I question the question about the with power. You don't have to have power. Racism is prejudice without power.
That's the next.
And, I like the word which you used. The question of it has an influence.
Right.
It has a more powerful influence if you have power. If you don't have power, it is. Let me stop. I want to reserve the comments for further. I'll back to you, Garrett.
Thanks. So I'm going to go to the next definition, which is a belief or doctrine that inherent differences amongst various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement. Basically saying that someone has achieved things or not achieved things based on the race that they're from. And the idea that it often involves the idea that a race is either superior or inferior, whether it's their own race or another race. It involves that one is either inferior or superior. And in this case, I guess, when I think of racial groups, there's two things that come to mind. One is the fact that if you look at the genetic differences, not that genes are everything. I think there's nature, which is genes, nurture, which is how we're born, and then free will. And I would argue free will is the most powerful. And so genes aren't even the most important of those three. But if you take the genetic view of things, studies have shown that the differences within ethnic groups or racial groups are actually more diverse than the differences across racial groups. And so what that means is that, racial groups is not even a very meaningful determinant genetically of differences. And so to me, it's just generally logically undefendable to see people as good or bad because of the way they were born, something that they have absolutely no control over. And I think it actually can be broadened to not just racism, but that anything that someone was born into, whether it's, the socioeconomic wealth that they were born into, the family that they were born into, you know, the color of their skin, the color of their eyes, like anything that someone has no control over, you shouldn't judge someone for as being good or bad, having achieved or not achieved, being inferior or superior based on anything that someone can't control. And so that said, you know, I'm curious if anyone can defend racism from this perspective. If there's anyone that thinks that, hey, Garrett, you're wrong, like, you know, there is a defense for racism, and here's what it is. And I'm willing to listen with an open mind, and I don't mind being wrong. I like to say, if we admit we're wrong with good judgment, we're immediately more right than we were before, because hey, we were willing to acknowledge we were wrong. And so if anyone wants to raise their hand, trying to defend that this definition of racism is okay, you know, I would love to hear your perspective.
Wouldn't it be? I thought it was just simply a means to an end.
It probably is a means to an end, and that's what and that was Nicholas. That's what I think the book that gave the historical examples of racism. Basically, people use racism to, I believe, and that probably would have been a good thing for me to have delved into, but I didn't. I kind of handled it on the surface, and normally I go deep, but I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for tonight. So, but I think that probably the book that was mentioned earlier on goes into all of the ways that racism has been used to control populations and convince people to create wars and, you know, basically subjugate people in ways that benefited the few and subjugated the many very often, or subjugated the few to the benefit of another small few under the guise of helping the many. And so very Machiavellian sorts of things to do. So that said, you know, I don't know, Derek, if you wanted to try to defend this version of racism. I have a feeling from what you said earlier that that's not what you're trying to do, but if you are, feel free to speak up now. Otherwise, I'll come back to you in the discussion portion.
I just want to be clear on the what you're expecting of me, Garrett. This is the second definition we're talking.
This is the second definition.
Yeah,
so
I would not defend the first one. I would attack it based on Bethencourt's work.
Okay.
I would also, because the problem with it is that it seems to imply this minority majority thing, and
right.
that is never historically that isn't the case. I mean, if a minority can't be racist, then I guess South African apartheid by white people on the majority, Black Zulus or whatever, was okay.
It's not. Yeah, it's not.
That's right. It just doesn't. But this one here, I think would be something that Bethencourt would line up with, because it deals with you identify these differences and between that group, and there's nothing in that says minority or majority. It's just that group, that identifiable group, and putting yourself as superior and treating them as inferior, which fits, and a matter of domination. And this doesn't actually go to the motivation, but his finding was that triggered by political projects monopolizing specific economic and social resources. That it kind of explains slavery right there, wherever it happened. But it can explain things short of that as well. So I would, based on what I know so far, I would support definition number 2.
Yeah, I think definition number, they're both definitions that are widely used. By the way, definition number 1, I don't think you would necessarily find fault with the way that the definition was written. It was my description, which I admit was flawed. My description was what called it minority versus majority, but like there are plenty of examples where you know, foreign powers put minorities in a position of power over the majority. And in those cases, like in South Africa, you know, white people were the ones with the power, even though they were a minority. And just like we put in power, I forget if the Sunnis or the Shias were the minority, but we put whichever one was the minority in Iraq in power so that we could hegemonically control Iraq, because hey, that's what the CIA does for fun. And so
I think it was the opposite. I think that the Saddam Hussein was representing the Sunni minority, which tyrannized the majority Shia.
Yeah, I think that
and so the US, what came after the US invasion was a more balanced representation. Now getting the minority and majority working together, that's another whole issue, but
yeah,
it was a minority rule, but I guess that brings that. So yeah, if you had all the power with the Sunni minority under Saddam Hussein tyrannizing a majority, yeah, that would be a prejudice with power. Marginalizing the Shia and dominating and committing atrocities against them. And
so Saddam was
as well as the Kurds, I might add.
Saddam was a part of the Sunni minority actually in Iraq, so he was a part of the minority that was terrorizing the majority, it's a little bit complex about how he got into power, but let's not delve into that for tonight. But yeah, so it's a little off topic. So that said, the question is more whether or not one can justify this definition of racism. Is there ever a good reason to be racist where it's okay to be racist? Does anyone think that there's a good reason that we should be racist, or that someone could justify being racist under any circumstance that a reasonable person would agree with?
Inherent difference clause, I'm not sure what. When you get into religion between Sunni and Shia and other differences based on religion in other parts of the world, Hindu versus Muslim, whatever in India, people throw those differences and the prejudice and the violence that results from it, they include that as racism. That's almost a separate question, isn't it?
Well, it is a separate question, but that's the one that I'm asking, is whether or not this definition of racism can ever be justified. Does anyone think that it's justifiable? And please only raise your hand. I'm going to be very strict if I get one more person saying anything other than this is I want to let, I think that the majority of people here don't think that racism is justifiable. I want to hear from someone who says, Garrett, racism is justifiable. If you do not think racism is justifiable, do not raise your hand right now. So do not raise your hand if you don't think racism is justifiable. So I only want hands from people who think racism is justifiable. And I know several of you don't think racism is justifiable. So.
Hi, Garrett.
Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely do not agree.
Hang on. You're skipping through the list here. You got to go from top to bottom, don't you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop taking questions because I don't think any of you actually think racism is justifiable. I'm going to first, after I present, I'm going to try to ask for anyone that thinks that racism or stereotypes are justifiable, and I'll.
Not unless you hate your own race.
Yeah, so I was actually going to present an argument that I don't personally agree with or endorse. But regarding this, I think that we have to recognize that oftentimes there are many scenarios where people pursue things out of their self-interest that's not necessarily ethical. And I can see a potential justification for this or something close to this definition, like in the economic interest of certain groups to pursue this policy, mostly based on the fact that if whatever in-group it may be, and it could very well be that in-groups based on race has historically, or even by kind of human nature, have some ability to create, greater trust than normal between that in-group, that potentially the collaboration between in-group could allow them to accrue certain economic, or to accrue certain advantages, allows them to dominate and subjugate an out-group and extract economic benefits that's greater than the cost of doing so. So I'm mostly kind of basing that on kind of economics conflict theory, which again, I'm not agreeing with it, but I'm just pointing out that there's potentially economic benefits for groups doing this.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm gonna hold commenting on that until the end. So I'm gonna go to the next definition of stereotype. Basically, I didn't like the dictionary definition. It was not easy to follow, and I didn't think very clear. But the ChatGPT definition was actually much clearer, which is a widely held but oversimplified, remember the word oversimplified, and generalized belief or idea about a particular group of people, often relating to their characteristics, behaviors, abilities, or attributes. Someone mentioned in racism, talking about Shia versus Sunni. Well, those would be considered the same race in general. Now they're different. Like it would, those would be valid stereotypes of Shias are always like this, Sunnis are always like this, but they're not, there seems to be someone not on mute. So they're not different races. So that said, stereotypes can be based on just about anything, but the key is that they're oversimplified and they're a generalized belief. And so keep that in mind when we evaluate the veracity of stereotypes. They often, it says they often arise from incomplete or distorted information and can perpetuate misconceptions and reinforce prejudicial attitudes. So that said, I tried really hard to think of a justifiable stereotype, and my best attempt is, suppose that you're walking down the street and someone of a different race holds up a gun to you and says, give me all your money, right? Well, I'm going to generalize that person is dangerous and I'm going to give them my money. But the truth is that doesn't actually meet the definition, because it doesn't meet the definition of oversimplified. Because when I asked ChatGPT what it means by oversimplified, it is good at clarifying things like that, even though it's not good at giving it sources, which I don't like. And apparently BART is getting better at giving sources, which I do like. It said that within the context, oversimplified means reducing the complexity and diversity of a group to a limited set of characteristics or attributes without acknowledging individual differences within that group. Whereas, this is not a generalization of a group of people. It's an individual characteristic of that person who has a gun and has physically threatened me. And so I think I'm justified in thinking that person is a threat and giving them my money. And I don't think I'm committing a stereotype by doing it. An example of a stereotype would be saying all British people love tea, right? Well, a lot of British people love tea, and it's pretty common to like tea in Britain, but not every British person loves tea. So, I would argue that there really is no good reason to stereotype people. And so instead of that, what I would consider is that, or suggest that we consider, is that we should judge individuals based on their words and their actions. And, don't judge people based on the groups that they associate with. And while theoretically you may think that a group that someone associates with is in 100% agreement, I would argue that is extremely rare. And almost always there are diverse opinions within groups. Being an American, people love to create stereotypes about Americans. And, all Americans are terrible at geography. Well, I'm actually not terrible at geography. I'm not probably as good as some people from other parts of the world that are in more, geographically diverse areas, but I'm not terrible. I can point to a lot of countries on a map. And there are a lot of stereotypes of, not only Americans, but of so many other groups that I think are unjustified. And I just would encourage everybody to, instead of making generalizations, and in the social, I shared my quote about generalizations, which is that the only generalization that's fair to make is that generalizations are generally unsafe to make. And so, that generalization I think is fair, but the other generalizations I would steer away from. And so, I think it's always better to ask people, if you think that they're part of a group that has a certain generalization and it's relevant to the conversation, ask them, hey, do you think X? And see if they actually self-associate with the belief that you think that they associate with because they're a part of that group. And so that said, that's really the end of the presentation. So we'll get to questions now. Like I said, it's not long. It was mostly questions so and comments. And so I do want to give everybody a chance to speak. And now we can go into the I want to first ask if anyone thinks that I'm wrong here. I like to look for people that think that I'm wrong first, because there's like a psychology situation that we talked about in types of bias. And it's basically like if 3 or 4 or 5 people all agree with a concept, then people who disagree stop being willing to speak up. And there are some of us that will still speak up even in those situations. And I won't call people out because I was doing that last time and I may have put people on the spot too much. But some of our attendees are good about speaking up when they disagree, even if there have been a bunch of people agreeing. But I really want to give people that might want to defend racism or stereotypes if there are cases that they think would be justifiable. And I do want to address now Charles's example. I think it's a good one because I think often people will agree with a certain stereotype. I've noticed, for example, in interactions with some groups, I noticed that, and I'm going to keep this very general, but I've noticed that interactions with some groups, there's favoritism in certain scenarios towards their own group in business, business engagement. And what I think, while I think people do that with the idea that if everybody in our group favors our group, then we will all be, better off in business. I think there's also, when other people notice that, then there starts to become a negative association with people in that group. And I won't name what group it is, but I actually have 2 groups in mind. So it's not just one, but one of those groups has been stereotyped that way. And probably both have, to be honest. And when you get stereotyped that way, other people have a negative association with the group. And then you lose out on everybody that's not a part of that group thinking, well, I'm going to be less likely to do business with that group because they're insular. And so I would argue that while Charles is right, I think some people justify stereotypes by thinking it's in their best interest. I would argue it's not in their best interest. We're actually, it's in more of our best interest to not stereotype and to judge each person as an individual. Because, for example, if you favor people from your own background because you want to have that insular relationship, but then that person ends up screwing you over, well, you actually favor that person for the wrong reasons. If you instead choose to do business with people who are trustworthy and that you can rely on, then you're far more likely to be a successful business person than you are to do it based on something that has no reflection on the person's character or background, and their actions and words, which is what I was saying I think we should judge people on. So that said, I do agree that Charles's reason is a reason that a lot of people would justify stereotypes. I don't think it's a valid reason that a reasonable person, given a good knowledge of psychology and modern game theory, would agree is actually justifiable. I think it would actually end up causing more harm than good in the information traveling world that we live in. So that said, I'm going to let Will go because he's got his hand up and he was first.
Excuse me. How can I raise my hand?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go under reactions on the bottom, and then there will be a raise hand option. And then the other thing I wanted to, I want to have, sorry, Will, we're going to let you go in 1 second, Will. Michael, well, I think I already made the announcement of like 2 to 3 minutes, and also to keep to one one subject at a time, like one subject or question per time that you raise your hand. And then the last thing is under reactions, there's a little party hat. So if someone says something that you want to respond to, like in like less than 10 or 15 seconds, but you want to kind of have some back and forth, like I'm going to try to like engage with whoever speaks up so that they feel heard and it's not disjointed conversation of each person saying what they want and no one feeling heard. But if you want to interact directly with someone whose hand was raised and spoke up, just do this little party hat thing that I'm doing here, which is under reactions, and then we'll let you talk. If I don't let you talk, it's probably because I didn't notice the party hat, and Michael's gonna try to notice them for me. But if neither one of us notice, then just speak over me, or whoever's talking, and we'll give you a chance to speak. Just let them finish their thought and then speak up. So Mike, you have your party hat on. Do you want to respond to me?
Yeah, using
All right, David. I'm sorry, Will was first. So go ahead, Will.
Thanks, Garrett. Very interesting topic.
but
Oh no, he's back again.
Sorry, Mike.
It's-
Mike, did you want to respond to what I just said? Because I was just giving an intro. So I think
Well, the issue is that any of these definitions are good, but how can racism be used to the advantage of somebody? And
Mike,
that's
Mike,
going now.
Mike, we'll give you a chance to talk. It's Will's turn, and then David will go next, and then it's your turn.
Well, that was the end of my comment. It's on point. I probably could explain it a little bit further.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. So go ahead, Will.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. And I just want to make it clear, I'm a centrist politically, but if pushed, I'll always go to the left. I try to judge everything on issues. I'll always go to the left. So before I say my little spiel, I just want to make that clear. I'm not some sort of right-wing nasty guy. However, I think we can oversimplify things. We can be overly politically correct, and I think it's to the detriment of the good, of the greater good, being too politically correct, going too woke. This is what put Trump in power. There's a backlash against wokeism. So I think we need to be careful and just judge things on their merits. There's a difference between stereotypes and generalization. The stereotypes are real. There's the expression that he was the classic stereotype, say, of a guy sitting in a bar, betting on the greyhounds, drinking a beer. He's got a little bit of meth in his car, goes home, beats his wife, kicks the dog, unemployed. He was the classic stereotype. People do fall into categories and behavior patterns. They become stereotypes. But to generalize would be to say that everybody in the bar betting on the greyhounds is a meth head wife beater. That's the generalization. So there's a clear difference there between stereotypes, which can be very useful. I mean, we come from a long line of ancestors who erred on the side of caution. So when there's a potential threat, say a branch on the ground, our ancestors, and we too have inherited this propensity, will mistake the branch on the ground for a snake, because the ones who thought that the snake was a branch and didn't treat it with due respect didn't live as long to pass on as many genes as the ones who erred on the side of caution. So I think when we see those guys coming at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you're walking home from the bar and they're coming towards you, you categorize them as potential threats and you cross the road. That's a very wise generalization. And it's there for a reason. However, it can be used inappropriately. And I'll just say to close that all my grandfathers were in World War II, as was my father. They fought for England, and then their whole region of West London was completely taken over by Pakistanis everywhere. Now, I view all life equal. I have compassion and respect for all life, but they started, as they were getting driven out of their historical homes, they started to feel resentment to the Pakistanis. And this is just human nature. Pakistanis would feel resentment if Englishmen were coming in by the millions and taking over their land. So we can't avoid our human nature because it's to the detriment. Because if government doesn't address innate traits in human behavior, then all hell breaks loose. So for the good of everyone, we need to just be sensible. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
So Will, I guess, I don't think you're using the definition of stereotype that I put in the chat or that I shared. Because, it says oversimplified, and I defined what is meant by oversimplified, oversimplified generalizations rather than just generalizations that are actually accurate to a group of people. And what you're talking about is, things that are actually accurate to a group of people in your first example. But then when you talk about the Pakistanis, that becomes a more real example. And I don't know that, I think what you're saying, and let me just make sure I'm listening and understand here. I think what you're saying is that if one group is being forced out of a neighborhood by another group, the group being forced out will always inherently think that the group forcing them out is, think of them negatively because of their say racial structure in the case that you're talking about, where they would always dislike Pakistanis for being forced out by the Pakistanis. Is that what you meant?
I'm just saying it's human nature that you will feel a little bit of resentment. It doesn't even mean that.
Is it resentment towards those people for being Pakistani, or is it resentment for being forced out of their neighborhood by a group of people?
I'd say both. I mean, it will translate into the human nature because we're not perfect. If you look at the world, we are pretty, we're pretty flawed creatures. And we blame others. This is just an observation of the human psyche. And then if, say, another race is taken over your entire neighborhood, you feel resentment. People
Sounds
do.
like
I probably
baboons.
don't, actually. I'd be in the minority of it. But as a student of human behavior and fascinated by our species, I can clearly see that most people want to blame someone. And this is where it's up to the government to not let that happen.
Right. But once upon a time, everybody thought slavery was normal. And it was only as we started to realize that that type of behavior was unethical that we started to make it illegal to own slaves. And it was the minority that thought slavery should be illegal in the beginning. It was like a norm that slavery is just natural. It's been natural for thousands of years. Even the Bible, a holy book, says how much you should pay for a dead slave if you kill them.
But then,
right? Slavery was just considered the norm. That doesn't mean that racism is
under that reasoning.
Let me just finish, Will. Let me just finish, Will.
That's a straw man.
Let me just finish, Will. So all I'm saying is that while certain things are a part of human nature, I would argue that we should be doing our best to understand and move morality forward and move the state of ethics forward by deciding what is a reasonable assumption to make about someone and what's an unreasonable one, and to judge people for their actions and their words. If a group of people forces you out of their neighborhood and they tell you, they light stakes in your front lawn and get you to move out, like that group is unethical, and I'm going to dislike that group for getting me out of my neighborhood. If they buy my house for market rate and I sell to them, I'm not going to hate that group for buying my house for market rate. And if all my neighbors around me sell, I'm not going to hate the group that bought their houses. That's unreasonable.
Yeah, but Garrett, that I think you've created a bit of a straw man argument there, in that because slavery is abhorrent, and this was only realized later, that therefore any human behavior can be overthrown and seen historically as being actually unacceptable, where some things are just innate in human nature. And I'd say that when you are being overrun by another race completely, where do you draw the line? Everyone in your country is now Indian or Chinese. Of course you're going to feel resentment. You can't have this rose-colored view of, oh, kumbaya, everyone, it's just we've all got a hug. No, people will feel resentment. And I'll just say very quickly, I was in a group the other day and they posted a hate video about transgender people. And I got into a very vehement debate with the people who did it and saying this was wrong, it was hate speech, and they should be ashamed of themselves. It was disgusting because they put a generalization about transgender people. So I'm not one of the bad guys. I'm just saying there's an element in human nature where we do feel resentment when we're driven off our own land. And I think that's perfectly natural. And I know, you know, anyway, I'll stop. Let someone else go.
Yep. Let's go to the next person. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I can continue on from where Will was started, because, you know, I think generalizations are what we do continuously every day in every way in order to function and live. You know, I mean, I can't every morning wonder whether the cars are going to not stay on the road but come on the sidewalk. I can't, you know, when I'm walking in towards somebody, I can't assume that they're going to behave in a, you know, in a dangerous way. You couldn't live if you didn't generalize that most people are reasonable and most cars will stay on the road and the sun will shine. We generalize about everything, and yet now in this group you're suggesting except for other people we cannot generalize about other people, and that's what I think is a little bit unrealistic, let's put it that way. And you know, your second definition, I thought actually there should be three, because I thought the second definition, if you just read the first part of it, the first, I'm not sure if it was a sentence or part of a sentence, where different genetics might lead to different achievement. That part is sort of a scientific question that you can actually investigate. After that, there was the part about it's okay to enslave them or something like that. To me, that's a sort of a third type of a thing. So, okay, you know, again, because I was working in medicine, I know there are inherent differences in the way medicine works in different races. There's also inherent different rates of disease in the different races. So you can't say that there is nothing about race other than, say, the color of the skin or the morphology of their body, you know, how the facial features say. I don't think that's well, for me, I don't see that as being significant. I think, you know, it's more the cultural, as Will was suggesting, you know, if you live in a neighborhood that was pretty similar to yourself, and then everyone sells out to a group that's quite different, and you don't know the language, and people, you know, behave differently from what you're used to, how could you not feel resentment? I think it's, as Will said, human nature to prefer people who are somewhat similar to yourself, you know, and you used Garrett, you used the thing, if you're walking down the street at night or you get into an elevator and there's 5 little old ladies, you'll feel differently than if there's 5 young men. I mean, you know, it's just, this is how we survive, this is how we live. So generalizations in and of themselves, I don't think, even when it comes to humans, is a bad thing. And I think it's not over. Let me just finish. It's not oversimplified. I think it's aptly simplified, because we cannot know each and every person of a group. So we have to make generalizations. So it's aptly rather than oversimplified. That's all I have to say.
Michael, if you can keep track of the time for me,
Okay.
We're trying. We have a lot of hands up. So, you know, and please, everybody, try to focus on one topic or one question or comment per time that you raise your hand. There will be plenty of time for everybody to ask more than one question or make more than one comment, but we want to get through each person, and I want to do justice to each question and comment rather than gloss over them. Like, we want to hit each one, you know, carefully and thoughtfully. David, tonight's discussion was not about generalizations. No one argued against generalizations. I didn't present anything on generalizations. So everything about generalizations, like, okay, generalize, you know, all you want, except what I said is oversimplified generalizations, which means that you assume someone has the characteristic or attribute of the entire group without acknowledging that there are differences in the group. Again, all British people like tea is...
That's a naive, if you're going to use that definition, that's a naive, I mean, you'll never, you know, you can't go anywhere with that, because obviously no group is 100% anything.
The problem
So,
is, David,
straw dog.
Will gave a great example where he felt that it was justified, right? He said, if you're being run out of your neighborhood by people of a certain ethnicity, how can you not feel animosity towards that ethnicity for running you out of your neighborhood, quote unquote?
No, but that's not the same argument. 100%. You're saying the group that we're discussing is 100% alike in in all the traits, and that's unrealistic. Every group has different people who have different parts of the different, but there are generalizations about the group, as like British like tea, Americans tend to like coffee. Obviously, right. There's some English that like coffee. There's a lot of Americans that like tea. But as a generalization, more English like tea and more Americans like coffee. That is what we're talking about. It's not 100%.
That's what you're talking about. And by your definition, David, I will agree with you that stereotypes can make sense. Because yes, if you say that British people like tea, I'm going to agree with you. And that's not, according to the ChatGPT definition of stereotype, a stereotype. Because you're saying generally British people like tea. If I said all British people like tea, that's a stereotype where you're.
But if a British person walks into and says nothing, say I'm a restaurant or something. A British person walks in, I serve them tea because they say nothing, and then an American walks in, I serve coffee. That's the way you have to go, even though 100% of English do not drink tea and 100% of coffee. But you have to bet on the general trait of a group.
David, you chose the wrong industry. I'm in the hospitality industry, my friend. What you do when someone walks into your restaurant is say, "Would you like coffee or tea, sir?" Man?
I know.
You always ask, and that's exactly no, David. This is very meaningful. This is exactly what the dialogue is about. It's about not the golden rule. It's about the platinum rule, which is treat other people the way they want to be treated. And David, you don't want me making assumptions about you because you're Canadian and be like, all those Canadians are like this.
I don't mind, because it makes sense.
David, if I started doing it, it would bother you.
No, it wouldn't. Because Canadians.
David, I'm not going to embarrass you in front of a group of people.
No, I will apologize for anything you say about me. I'll say, sorry, you're right. That's the way I am. That's Canadian.
Your diagnosis, the fact that you're doing all of this with a form of cerebral palsy is just mind-blowing. Yeah, I was diagnosed.
Wait. Let's raise our hands.
So, Sulin, I don't know if you realized you were off mute, but if you want to talk, just raise your hand. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and in many ways, I find agreement with both what Garrett, you said, and as well as some of the things that David said. And I think there are some kind of overlap, or maybe to attempt to bridge that. I think that if we look at it from an economic standpoint, right, we have to maybe it'd be useful to quantify the cost and the benefit and the harm in terms of making generalizations. And one of the ways that like racism and especially racial stereotypes is so pernicious and harmful is precisely because the cost from these stereotypes to the group that's being discriminated against is so high, right? Because that could mean job denial, could mean, even kind of legal discrimination and all sorts of nasty stuff we've definitely seen over the course of history. Whereas, for example, generalizing about, let's say, senior people maybe are slightly more prone to falls or something like that, would be kind of less pernicious, or and maybe is less kind of hitting at some sort of core identity. So I do kind of wonder maybe for getting even closer to the truth and how to create a society that's less racist is kind of taking into account the cost associated with these things. For example, if in a situation where the cost of obtaining much more accurate information about a person, like knowing, okay, this person looks British, but does he really like tea or coffee or something else? If the cost is really low, then it makes sense for the person interacting with that person to ask that question. And this can kind of also bring up the bigger question, not just only about how individuals should react, but also about how we can create a society so that it makes it easier for individuals to be less prejudiced and less kind of harmful based on generalization of stereotypes to others. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that I think that the concept of introducing does it cause harm into it makes a lot of sense, and that actually aligns really well with the fourth intention of the FTI, which is, trying to minimize significant unnecessary harm for everybody and trying to increase happiness and decrease harm for everybody. If you're doing those things in your generalizations, then maybe the generalizations are good, right? Like maybe if I mean, like I'm going to try to think of an example and I'm going to try to shoot a hole in my own argument and see if I can come up with an example that does that. But I think that's a good way of moving the conversation forward, Charles. Thanks for doing that. And with that said, I'm going to let Dr. B go.
Thank you, Garrett. Would you be kind to post your second definition on the board or on the...
Yes.
Thank you. And my question, my response has to do with the use of certain words. You talk about, where did you post it? Let me see. Oh, wait, okay. There was that, if you change the question about the exercise of power based on prejudice, if you change those words, I'm seeking a way in which we can make racism positive. And the words that I would use, I borrow 2 words from Maslow's theory. Just imagine if you took out prejudice and take out power, and instead you call it empowerment for self-actualization. Racism becomes very positive. You can use race for the benefit of humankind, which is very much central to what you and your Freethinker Institute is aiming to achieve. And that's what we as members who feel privileged to be in your presence, to carry this mission forward, to suggest vocabulary where we take out the negative words, replace them with positive words, and the words I suggest are empowerment for self-actualization. On the humorous side, which I have to always add, when the US Census comes out and they ask me, what is my race? You know my answer?
What?
Human.
Thank
you very much. Thank you very much.
Good to be amongst you, fellow human, because I'm human too. I didn't quite follow when you said that if we took out power, if we said racism is prejudice, you're saying that that's a form of actualization to be racist if racism is prejudice?
No, if you take out the words of prejudice with power, you take out those and replace them as empowerment for self-actualization. You can use racism for the actualization of specific cohorts of human beings. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to give it a positive spin because racism has got so entangled with the negative that we have lost our capacity to question whether racism can actually be used for good.
See, that's what I think affirmative action really tried to do, is to create, sort of reverse racism to give an advantage to historically, marginalized races. But the problem is that doesn't take into consideration often much more important factors like socioeconomic factors. And that's where we had an event on affirmative action. And I basically made the argument that affirmative action should be socioeconomically based, not race-based, because that would be a proxy for race in very many cases, but it doesn't sort of give a benefit to people who are socioeconomically really well off, even if they're part of a historically marginalized race, which can very easily be seen as unfair by most standards, because if you have enough money, then you have a big advantage, that was, but I don't want to digress on that. But I do think I came up with an argument for supporting a stereotype, but I want to let all the hands go, and then if we get time, I'll present an argument where I think stereotyping actually does make sense. So thank you, Dr. B. And Charles, by the way, your hand is still up. So Brian, go ahead next. Charles, I'll just put your hand down.
Yeah, I want to say that there's probably a positive role that stereotypes can have. My friend and I were walking through Barcelona, walking through some of the back streets, and there were fewer and fewer Caucasians there. And she and I were Caucasians. And I was just stereotyping, generalizing. I don't think it was racism per se. Maybe it just wasn't a good idea for two white folks to be in there. So I used a stereotype. Let's get out of there. So it's probabilistically, we got out of there safely. But probably I might not have had it been darker in another neighborhood. I don't know. So it's contextual, it's probabilities, stereotypes would have played a role there. So stay out of certain neighborhoods, I guess, but
that wouldn't that
as a caveat,
wouldn't that mean that you would want to stay out of those neighborhoods like at any time of night, not because of no?
No, this is the middle of the afternoon.
Okay, so you think that what is the stereotype that you were making?
Well, as the faces became more and more numerous, the darker faces became more and more numerous, the other than Caucasians, maybe I saw too many B-rate movies.
Yeah.
I suspect a lot of this is media. I've been watching too many B-rate movies, and I'm at the point now where I don't want to see certain ethnic groups because they see them allegedly doing some pretty awful things. Men doing some pretty awful things to women. Muslims doing pretty awful things to Westerners. Westerners doing pretty awful things to Muslims. And I don't know. I have to stop TV, I guess. But again, so I guess the media kicks in here too, because it supports those kinds of things. Well, implicitly, kind of subtly. But anyway, I just became more and more, I use the word threatened or potentially threatened. No overt actions were taken against us, but I didn't want that to happen. So we found our way out. It was a maze. We got out of there as quickly as we could. I didn't raise the issue with her because I didn't want to freak her out. But I'm talking about the utility of a stereotype. Certain times, maybe you want the utility. A guy, some thug, you might encounter them. So that's a stereotype of a thug. Generally speaking, stay away from neighborhoods that have thugs.
Well, that was the example that I gave that I think, didn't match the name of the name of a stereotype is like, if a neighborhood is dangerous, staying out of a dangerous neighborhood is not a stereotype because you're not judging every single person in that neighborhood as dangerous. You're just saying it's a dangerous neighborhood, so I'm going to stay out of it. Now, proactively looking up what neighborhoods are dangerous and staying out of those neighborhoods is one thing. Assuming that a neighborhood is dangerous because of the color of skin of the people in the neighborhood, I don't know, like that becomes a different thing entirely. And I guess I would want to challenge your initial emotion, which was fear, and say, is that a justifiable assumption? And is it like it's perfectly fine to act on that if that's how you feel. Like, I'm not saying don't act on it if that's how you feel. I'm just saying, is it a rationally justifiable thing? And, in the cases of watching out for your safety, I think you should always do what you think will help you be safer. But and that's where I think, Charles's point of, trying to minimize significant unnecessary harm. If you feel like you're going to be in harm's way, like it's okay to take an action that doesn't cause harm to anyone else, meaning find your way out of the neighborhood. And that's a personal choice, but I also know people, I have a friend, that was going to Toronto, and then someone said best place you should go is Little Jamaica, right? Probably a lot of more dark faces, but that's where my friends are telling my friend to go, and she's an attractive woman, so like like different people are going to have different perspectives and therefore have different opportunities in life and miss out on different things in life based on the stereotypes that you know, and the fears that they have. And I like to tell my kids, fear is an opportunity to learn. What you need to figure out is what is it you need to learn from that fear. And sometimes what you need to learn is that the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. The other times you need to learn this is actually a valid fear and you need to be worried about it. And all I would argue is, you know, when you fear, try to think about what is it you need to learn. And we ultimately each have to trust our own judgment. So that said, thank you for your comment, Brian. I appreciate it and understand where you're coming from, and appreciate your sharing. Anna, go ahead.
As I listened to your presentation, which I really enjoyed, I could not help but replace the words race with gender. To me, the experiences are very similar. There are two physical characteristics which are most notable that you can't hide. One is race and the other is gender. And so for that reason, I guess it kind of took over my head, but I enjoyed it. I will leave you with the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill confirmation, where I think that people kind of were making a judgment. Let's see, do we go with our race or do we go with our gender? That's all.
Thank you, Anna. Appreciate that. I'm gonna say, I guess, you know, stereotyping, you know, racism is specific to race, but stereotyping can be across any variety of, you know, attributes, including gender, and so appreciate your bringing that into the mix. A lot of hands up, so I'm just going to keep going. Nicholas, go ahead.
Some of what our Aussie friend had, said made me wonder if he's referring to what was once called from a course I learned as baboon logic. See the stranger, fear the stranger, kill the stranger. It seems that some of that discussion you had with Will was reminding me of that.
I'm not following. Can you be maybe more explicit?
This baboon logic, I was during a course on the Holocaust I took once, it sort of is like an anthropological lens, I guess you could call it, to racism. Trying to figure out how far it can go back even from the anthropology. And scientists, I think, from what I understand, scientists can even show that baboons can be quite prejudicial too. And what the teacher calls baboon logic. And it goes by see the stranger, fear the stranger, hate the stranger, kill the stranger.
So you're saying that the logic of the people that were being forced out of their neighborhood was overly simplistic, that they were fearing the strangers for forcing them out of their neighborhood?
I guess I'm wondering if it can even go that far, if it can reach that far.
So are you arguing that for the case for
this thing? Whoa. Let's raise hands and do party hats.
he's talking to me directly. Can I respond or?
Yeah, go ahead, Will. It's okay. Thanks, Michael. It's a good reminder to everybody to do a party hat, but it's fine because Will is directly being addressed. So
okay.
So I'm just wondering if Nicholas was agreeing with the evolutionary psychological explanation for racism.
It sounded to, it sort of was reminding me of that, what you were talking about.
Yeah,
I was wondering if that was similar.
Everything we do is based in the DNA molecule. Every behavior, every human behavior is the result of millions of years of evolutionary selection. So I'd say racism is very ingrained to some degree. And if we just acknowledge that, we can rectify it and we can all be compassionate and get along. But you can't deny human nature. You do it at your peril. That's all I'm saying.
Well, better to try and resist it when you know it's there, I guess.
Yeah, as long as you know it's there. As long as you know it's there, yeah.
yeah, I would say though, Will, you know, people would have said 2,000 years ago that slavery is a part of human nature as well. And
It is.
we've learned now that that's actually not a part of human nature. It was a very overcomable thing. And it was unethical, and because we recognized it was unethical, we made it illegal. And similarly, we know that racism is unethical. It's just more recently that it was discovered, and therefore it's illegal to hire people based on race or not hire people based on race. And so there's a lot of, you know, careful observation that goes on for companies. And if you have a company who only has one race in the company, they're going to be looked at very carefully if they're any statistically significant company. And so, you know, their practices will be looked at, there will be lawsuits, and they'll get in trouble. And it's because racism is acknowledged to be unethical that it's legally enforced that people should not be institutionally racist for things like making a living.
Yeah, I agree. And I think racism is horrible. I really do. I don't like it at all. But I'm just saying certain government decisions create the perfect storm for it to arise, because you can't just make it not part of human nature to some degree in some individuals.
Well, I don't know that it is a part of human nature. I think that'll be an interesting comment for people to comment on. But, you know, when I take my kids, for example, I don't think they grow up in we have a pretty diverse town, and they play with kids of all different races. We've never taught them to be racist in any way in our family. And I don't think any of their friends have taught them to be racist. So I don't think they even know what racism is. You know, they're 6, you know. So
well, maybe I worded it wrongly. Maybe, sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, if you're forced into becoming a minority group in your own country, and you're now in the minority group, irrespective of racism or anything else, resentment arises.
My kids are a minority. They're half Asian. They're the only half Asian, half white kids in their school.
Say it again, sorry.
My kids are the only half Asian, half white kids in their entire school.
Yeah, I'm not talking about kids
small minority
in schools. Yeah, I'm talking about whole areas of, say, 50,000 people in one town are suddenly going from 50,000 Englishmen to 49,999 Pakistanis.
Again, I don't want to stick to just the one example, but
well,
you know,
that's what I'm referring to. I'm just referring to that. In that situation, it creates animosity. That's all.
It's like our dormant genes would come alive for survival skills, something like that. It's sitting, but you give it the right environment.
Mari, if you could raise your party hat before you pick up, if you could. The underreactions, and then you can do the little party hat. So Jody.
Okay. All right. I'm trying not to be aggravated, but I'm feeling I'm feeling very, very aggravated.
Take a few
because
deep breaths, Jody. A few deep breaths.
okay, deep breath. Because hey, I am Pakistani, I am Indian, I have lived in Iraq, I have lived in Kuwait, I've lived in Turkey, I've lived in New Jersey, I've lived in an all-white neighborhood, I've lived in an all-black neighborhood, I have lived in an all I'm female, I'm 25 years old, I am 5'7". So what would you like to use to quote unquote discriminate against? I mean, everybody's a minority in some way and everybody's a majority in some way. And that neighborhood that is quote unquote all white, where all the Pakistanis have come and ruined it, well, 100 years ago, maybe all the Pakistanis lived there and the white people came and ruined it, like they did with the Native Americans. Okay, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath. And like, what are the properties or of white gray men? I could walk into a place and say, hey, I'm surrounded by all white gray men. They're gonna rape me. They're gonna, push me around. They're gonna whatever. I mean, am I to be more afraid of my child being roofied in college by a wealthy white fraternity boy, or a black person, adolescent, goes and knocks at a person's door in a white neighborhood and gets shot? So hello.
Yeah, no, I think great points, Jody. I'm glad you're keeping your cool. Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your opinion. I agree with you, and that's why I think that in general, we should judge people based on their words and their actions, not based on things that they can't control. Pakistani Indian combination is kind of cool, by the way. It's I have Pakistani and Indian people on my development team, and I try to remind everybody that it was all one country once upon a time before the British carved them up. So
yeah, now we're what? There's Bangladesh, there's Pakistan, there's India, there's and hey, all our jewels are with the English.
Yeah, just go to the English Museum, you'll see
Can I
them all.
make another comment?
So I mean,
Yeah.
I could sit here and rant about a lot of
Jody-
things too.
Jody,
Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now. Sorry.
Will wants to respond, and then Zana after that. Zana, I think it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I empathise with the Australian Aborigines here in Australia. The white man came and just started destroying everything, killing Aboriginal people, drove them off their land. If I was Aboriginal, I would be resentful to my ancestors, absolutely, and I think they take it very well. So all I'm talking about is any race that is driven from their land will feel resentment, and it's all right for Pakistan, I'm not racist. I'm really not. I had an Indian girlfriend at school. She was absolutely gorgeous. I loved her to death. I think all people are equal, but I just say that there are 1.4 billion Indians in this planet. There's 1.3 billion Chinese. There's 1 billion Pakistanis. There's 1 billion Africans. There's another 1 billion other Asians. There's another 1 billion South Americans. There's not many Anglos left, really. However, if you get driven out of your local environment, you're accused of being a racist. Try moving into China, India, or Pakistan and see how you go. The Indians are the most racist people on earth. They're even racist against their own people. They have a caste system where if you're in the middle caste, you're looked down by the upper class as being less than human, subhuman. So let's not have this virtuous view that all other races except white are pure and holy. White people in the absolute minority, and as the other races encroach upon our traditional homes, we are feel as racist for having any objection. So I'd just consider that as well. There might be a little bit of bias there from those crying foul.
So I think Jana, if I'm pronouncing it right, had her party hat next, and then Abe after her.
It's Zaina, like Dana.
Zaina, sorry. Go ahead, Zaina.
Well, Will kind of clarified his point, which is also what I was going to sort of do. I think I didn't want to mispronounce your name, Jyoti.
Jody. Is
Jyoti.
it Jody? Did I pronounce it
Jyoti.
right?
It's Jyoti.
Jyoti.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was gonna ask, well, I guess Will kind of made the point that there's resentment on both ends. It kind of, to me, the resentment I perceived from your contribution just a moment ago kind of proves Will's point that it is, you know, if someone comes into you where you're a majority and sort of subjugates you to a minority, it just kind of keeps going back and forth. So I just wanted to, I guess, throw that in there and also ask where that resentment, if I'm perceiving it correctly, comes from.
Are you saying that I'm resentful about something?
That's what I perceive, yes.
No, I'm not. What I was
Yeah,
trying to
what about
say.
grey white men?
Can
Grey
I?
white men,
No.
you gave them a
Wait,
good
hey.
pay.
Whoa, guys.
Okay.
Will.
Wait,
She
wait,
let you
hold on.
speak, and we're gonna let her speak.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that difference can be created in any group of people by skin color, by the color of their hair, by their gender. You can create difference however you want. And you can, you know, then say, oh, all gray-haired white people that are over the age of 75 are, you know, whatever, have colonized my country, or, you know, so they're just, you can create difference any way that you want by any definition. And it's incorrect because you don't know that person, you know, like, okay, I'll just talk about my own specific example. My son, you know, was 3 years old. I didn't want him to be in childcare or in facility childcare. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put a little ad on Craigslist, and there were a few people that applied, and one of them, his name was Gregory, came to the door, and I'm already going, why does he want a childcare job? It's a he. And then he, you know, came there, and not only he's a male, and I'm already like, you know, feeling negative emotions, negative thoughts about him. And what I had to do was I stepped back and said, hey, Jyoti, you are in an industry. I'm an engineer. And I worked with steel producers and steel, you know, users, which is very, very, you know, I'm a huge minority. I would walk into a meeting room and everybody is like, you know, completely different from me. So they could have made a judgment about me and not given me a chance to speak. So I had to go into that place and say, Jyoti, just give him a chance. You know, just listen to him as an individual. And he turned out to be the best person to take care of my child.
I guess my question comes from, you know, when you first started speaking, you said that you were sort of going to try not to get aggravated. And I just don't understand what about Will's point would, especially considering the example you just gave is a situation where you had some internal biases that you had to fight against, some natural, I don't know what to call them, stereotypes or inclinations. It just, I agree with Will. It seemed like there was some resentment towards white people, maybe.
Can I say, Garrett, are you okay with people going back and forth like this?
Let's let the conversation go back and forth.
Okay.
I want to hear Jody's response. Jyoti's response. I think I know where it's going, but I'm curious if I'm right.
Garrett, I just had a question about the hand raising. I put it up and it's been deleted 4 times now since we started this question. Am I doing something wrong?
No, so what we're doing is like we're on an individual's comment, Jyoti's comment, and then people wanted to comment back about that. And so we're staying on the individual person's topic. And so if you want to talk about this particular topic rather than raise a new topic, then you can raise your party hat. Like people are doing.
He's just saying that his hand keeps going down.
If your hand is going down, usually that happens because if you raise your hand or you speak, like, I don't know why it's going down. Like Zoom has some automated thing that like takes it down, but like it's usually like if you speak and then stop speaking, then it'll ask you, like it'll prompt you to, do you want to take your hand down? So
it's done it 4 times and I said nothing.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I would look up, Google
it just did it.
Zoom drop hands.
Yeah, actually, it just did it to me too. So that's what happens. You're right. If you talk, then it'll automatically take your hand down. Even if
you talk where you are, and you're not on mute, and then it'll take or even if you are on mute, maybe it'll take your hand down if you talk. So because
it has happened to me too, Gary.
It's trying to be more intelligent than it is. But let me let Jyoti respond to Zana's comment.
If you touch your space bar, it can unmute you as well, which means your hand goes down just by touching the space bar. So if you're typing and you hit the space bar, you lose your place in the queue as well.
Jyoti, did you want to respond to Zana or no?
Zana, can you elaborate a little bit on?
So the chain of events, from my perspective, was that Will made an argument that racism isn't essentially, I'm just paraphrasing here, but that racism is sort of natural or innate in humans, and that based on experiences, I think the example was, I'm not entirely sure what the example was, but one race of people or culture of people having a less than great experience with another group of people would develop resentment towards that group of people. And it just seemed like a response was not warranted. That aggravation that you said that you had, in my perspective, did not seem warranted to his point, because the point that he was making goes both ways. The point that you made, that anyone could be a minority depending on the context, still stands in Will's argument. I just didn't understand necessarily where the aggravation was coming from, and thought that maybe it could be some resentment on your part towards the very people that he was using in his example, which I think are white people. I'm not totally informed on that situation, so I don't know.
I was referring, I wanted my comments to be viewed in the context of I am aggravated. And I was aggravated not just because of Will's comments, but kind of the comments that had been going on from several people. So, but I wanted to put that out there.
Right.
I wanted to put that out there.
Can you just explain, Jyoti, why you were aggravated for the folks that didn't pick it up like me? So
I was aggravated because there were so many rationalizations for discriminating against people. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're using the example of the Pakistanis coming in to a white neighborhood and the whites feeling like they are no longer, the majority. But that's because we're viewing people according to where they come from. We could also view them according to something completely different. So people seemed to be really stuck on how a majority and how a minority, like that was based on nationality, based on their culture, that was, in a way, it was okay to be afraid, or everybody has their own, but see, what I'm trying to encourage people is have a personal relationship with somebody. Go and say hello, and you'll find that you have more things in common than you have different. Everybody loves their child. Everybody wants to put food on their table. Just the personal experience is getting lost here.
Not as easy as you think, especially coming from an autistic perspective.
So
we just want, I forgot to, I had mentioned this in my chat, that there are disabilities too. I mean, I have epilepsy. I've fallen down on the sidewalk, and I just want to really be proud of humanity that nobody has, taken advantage of that. Instead, everybody has been like, okay, are you okay? I'm going to call EMS. I'm going to this. And this is in any neighborhood. So I don't know. I guess my experience with individual people has always been that you're looking at the context and who you are rather than anyhow.
So guys, it's 8:36. We have like 7 hands up and I have 4 party hats. So trying to figure out, like, for those of you that have been raising your party hats, Abe's done it a lot of times, so I want to let him talk, but please, don't start a new topic. Just ask Jyoti clarifying questions. If you have a new topic, then you have to raise your hand.
Sure. I mean, I understand the resentment that Jyoti went through because, I was born in India. So I was born at a time in which most of the history we learned was the glorious thing of the British Empire. And it took a long time for it to change. And I'm here in the US. And my attitude is, I don't have to feel bad about where I came from because I came from a rich culture. I'm accepted in the white community. I'm accepted in the Black community. I don't feel bad. I mean, I know who I am. And when I go there, I have a lot to contribute in either community. And I look at people for who they are. And finally, what I understand is if I have the confidence in who I am, I mean, people accept me for who I am.
Where the hell do you get your confidence, man?
Isn't that how everybody is aiming? I hope every human is aiming to be like that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Appreciate it, Abe. So then other party hats were Charles, Victor, and Nari. But I want to ask if it's really important for you guys to speak up, go ahead, but otherwise we can keep going to the hands. So Charles, if it's important, go ahead, but otherwise, let me know.
So where am I in the hand order? Because it might be more efficient time-wise for me to...
Right after Victor.
Okay, so maybe I'll just keep the party hat down and just go.
Okay, so Victor, it's your turn to speak, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, much of what I was going to say when I raised my hand has already been said. So I'll try to see if I can add something. There is some traits in us coming from evolution, and it's there. But besides nature, there is culture and there is education. So I think that it's okay. I mean, we should acknowledge that our first reactions might be to suspect what is not our kin. But through education, we should be able to understand that humans are equally deserving of rights and consideration. When the issue of people moving into a neighborhood and displacing others, the first thought that came to my mind was the colonization of Canada. I am one of the Canadians here. And I think that the Native Americans here have a harbor resentment towards whites, even though I mean, I come from a group that itself had been persecuted, and okay, one can say that if you choose to live in Canada, then you are condoning what happened. But my son was born here, and he had no reason to be discriminated or hated for what other people of the same color had done in the past. So I think that we should push for education, and we should push for expanding this idea that we are all equal in some levels, and we're equal in deserving rights and considerations, and that there is no there's no stereotypes. That's it.
Thanks, Victor. By the way, guys, I wanted to introduce a valid case of stereotyping that sort of builds off of what Charles mentioned about increasing happiness, which is that if you're on an airline and someone has a heart attack on a plane, asking if a doctor can help is a stereotype that doctors will be able to help. It's a professional generalization, and you will assume that if someone is a doctor, that they're able to help. So that is a stereotype that will potentially save someone's life. So there are actually good reasons to stereotype in certain scenarios. I would argue that stereotypes are good only when they increase happiness and decrease harm for the people you can influence. And in that case, such a stereotype does, and therefore it's justifiable. That said,
or you could always capitalize on stereotypes as a comedian.
So Nicholas, raise your hand if you want to speak.
Sorry.
Charles, you have your hand up now.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to kind of hit maybe multiple points. So one of the things I think, today's discussion, we're getting into a lot of things that are somewhat peripheral, but also very important, at least maybe even more important from a practical standpoint on the issue of stereotypes. But I do want to kind of center it back to what Garrett was saying earlier. And I think this would be a more uncontroversial statement that most people would agree with, which is that if we had perfect information about each individual, their qualities, are they likely to attack you or not, are they productive, so on and so forth, can we all agree that stereotypes, racism, those type of things would basically disappear? Essentially, we would be acting judging our interactions or forming our interactions with the individual based on what we know about that person, right? I don't think that's that controversial. I think where these, in real world, even people who want to do the right thing, where stereotypes or racism come into play, is that oftentimes we're forced to act under imperfect information, and it actually occurs far more common than we would like it to be. And oftentimes, even if we tell ourselves, okay, let's do our best to search, to discover information about that individual so we don't unfairly penalize them for qualities that they don't actually possess, that the information search costs can be quite high. And most of this, I think, can be found in economics literature. And then we also have to keep in mind the risk assessment. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with catastrophic risk and making decisions under uncertainty, right? So for example, the risk, if the risk was catastrophic, like getting murdered or getting fired or something like that, then an individual is far more likely to take an extremely conservative approach. Like even if there's, let's say, a 1% chance, even if let's say they're 90% sure this person means no harm, but there's a 10% or 1% chance, but if the risk is that high, it's very likely that they may take the 1% chance. I'm introducing this example to show how risk analysis of determining what is rational, what is irrational can actually be quite difficult. And I think in this sense, a lot of the common reactions people have, you could even justify there's certain evolutionary basis for survival that they're kind of imputing here in their behavior. So that's one thing that I think I absolutely agree with Gary, your point about the irrationality of racism stereotype, right? And I do think that people oftentimes they don't take enough time to verify some easily verifiable information, but run on stereotype to the huge detriment of the person they're discriminating against. But I do think that if we want to be really thorough about it, we have to also kind of pay attention to these sort of examples. So that's one thing I want to mention. The other thing I want to mention is the issue of grievances, right? So I think even tonight, it kind of shows, right? There are, I think Will, I don't mean that in a bad way, but, him seeing people moving into his neighborhood and changing the character of that neighborhood probably will engender some grievances with him. But same thing, for, like, say, people who have been colonized, like maybe in Jyoti's situation or others, right? There's probably some, even I know everyone's fighting against it, there's probably some grievances there as well. So that also brings up the question of, okay, what is justifiable for somebody who has grievances? I mean, look at our country, for example. African Americans had been enslaved, terribly brutalized, discriminated against. Is there certain justifiable, let's say, stereotyping about white people or resentment that, I think some of that stuff definitely falls in the gray area. So I kind of want to point out there's actually a lot of gray area where we may want to kind of delve into. So that's another aspect. The other aspect I want to get into is the.
Oh, wait, we're getting into two. We're getting into two
no
topics.
No more than one topic, Charles. Sorry.
Okay. Maybe next time. Oh,
yeah, raise your hand again, and we'll come back to you. Hopefully, we'll have time. I agree with you that catastrophic risk, and that's why for the Brian's example in Spain, I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, if you think your life is in danger, like, save yourself. Like, if you think that that's what's actually happening. But I also think that what Jyoti did was very courageous in terms of, challenging her bias and saying, look, this is my child that I'm entrusting this person with. But rather than, judge them as incompetent and incapable because of their sex, like, or their gender, why not give them a chance and listen to them with an open mind and judge them as an individual looking for a job and seeing whether or not they're qualified. And when she did that, she found that they were qualified. And I do think it's very important that, and Charles has a great point, that there's search cost, right? It takes time to get to know people. And I think Will has a good point that most people have some inherent biases towards or against people. And I think all Jyoti is saying, if I understood it right, is be ready to challenge that in yourself and be ready to be wrong about those biases and judge people as individuals based on their words and their actions, which is what I said in the presentation. And I would agree with her. And that's why, I was feeling her frustration, because I was feeling people say, oh, this is all just how it is. And judging people for things that they can't control is just how people are. And, and comparing Aboriginals who got their land taken from them by force to people who, went into a free market transaction to sell their house for a lot of money, probably, is not a fair comparison.
That didn't happen in London, just to clarify.
What's that?
They didn't own their houses, their rents went up, just to clarify.
Well, I mean, it was still a free market. Like, if you choose not to buy your house, then you're subject to the whims of whoever is the landlord about who they want to rent to and how much rent they charge.
Oh, well, that's a little bit discriminating, isn't it? You're saying that because they couldn't afford their own houses, it's only themselves to blame in that case.
Are you saying that someone should be allowed to live in a place that they can't afford?
Well, I'm just saying that resentment will arise when rents are going up and another race is moving in because they can afford the rents and you can't.
I don't want to keep going back to it. Well, we've heard your grievance, and I hear you, and I know, and I will vouch for Will. He's a very nice guy and he's highly ethical. So I like Will a lot, and he's one of our moderators, and I hear you, Will. I heard you the first time. I just disagree with you, and it's okay for us to disagree. And that said, I want to let Brian go.
So just one little second, Will. Are you against capitalism?
To a degree, yeah.
Well,
I think it's gone way too far. There's a price on everything now. and we're all being fooled into thinking that we can find happiness in the capitalist model. So yeah, to a degree, not a great degree, just a little bit, I'm against capitalism. So you think it's okay for rents to be driven up, and I'm just saying that that's fine, capitalism is fine, but resentment will be felt. That's, if you want to view the world through rose-colored glasses, that's how Trump got elected. The insidious, evil Trump got elected from wokeism. And if you deny human nature, that people are driven out of their historical homes because of rents going up and because the other people are working for less money than the inhabitants, and you think they won't feel resentment, well, that's just, you're in Disneyland. I'm not saying it's a good thing, and I think all
Will, please try to keep it polite. You have a tendency to get a little bit.
All right, I said you're in Disneyland. I find it absurd. I'm not allowed to say that either. I realised recently I'm allowed to say.
Stay away from emotionally charged language.
That's still inflammatory.
Yeah, stay away from emotionally charged language.
I think you're mistaken. I think you're greatly mistaken if you think that people.
That is a more polite way of saying it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.
Has anyone ever heard of Has anyone ever heard of this movie called The Man in the White Suit?
Nicholas, you have to raise your hand if you want to talk. We have a lot of hands up and only 10 minutes left. I want to let people that haven't spoken speak, because there are a few hands up from people who have not had the chance to speak yet, and it's late in the night and we're not going to get to everybody probably. So I think the first person who hasn't spoken with their hand up.
You calling me?
What's that?
Before Will. Well, Will's got a good point. We'll talk about that later. We're human beings.
Brian, you've already spoken, so if you don't mind.
I did, but I have a couple points which I think will illustrate some of the points.
Yeah, but I want the people that haven't spoken
to
speak, if you don't mind.
I'll shut up.
I'm not asking you to shut up. I'm just asking you to let people that haven't spoken.
I'm sitting in the background. Speak. Go on. I'm sitting in the background. Call me when you're ready.
So, Dave from Tacoma, I think you've already spoken, right? Or have you not? Okay, go ahead. I think Derek, you already spoke, right? No? Okay. So Derek is first, then Dave, then Ginny, then Jeff, and then Kay. So we have a lot of people that haven't spoken that have their hands up. So Derek, go ahead.
Okay. The point I was wanting to make is that at the beginning, we looked at definitions of racism. We looked at two of them, but there's the question of the concept of race in the first place. And in that Bethencourt book, he was talking about racism as preceding any theories of race. And the question is, what is race? Race is a social construct. And if you view that as a social construct rather than an inherent characteristic in and of itself, you will come at some of these questions quite differently. There's a lot of academic discussion and theories about that argue that race is a social construct. And that people there's a illustrating, there was a point that alluded to that earlier, and that the differences within a so-called race are greater than the ones between them. I think maybe Garrett, you mentioned that.
I did mention that, although I don't agree with the race as a social construct perspective, but I do think that there's, it's an overinflated attribute, but I don't agree that it's a social construct. It's a very real thing. Even if it's a social construct, it's still a very real thing to all the people who believe in it. But that said, I want to let Dave go. Thank you, Derek, for your comment.
I just wanted to clarify that it's not to say it doesn't exist.
Okay.
Race does exist, but it is a social construct.
So Dave from Tacoma.
Yeah, thanks. And a quick offering to my friend Will, who's I hope is a friend, but often the wealthy are easily mobile, and they're the ones that flee the suburbs and leave the working class in the depressed area where the other people are moving in. But I did want to offer one little factoid about who's going to kill me. because we have all this fear that this minority guy is going to kill me as I'm walking down the street, or I'm walking down the street and there's people that look different than I am. They're going to kill me. I'll tell you who's going to kill me. A white European guy, me. The suicide rate is twice the homicide rate. Keep that in mind, because we fear the other and we need to get over it. Thank you very much. An interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Ginny, I'm going to let you go next.
Garrett, all I want to say is this. What a wonderful, wonderful topic you have chosen tonight. And this is not the first time I've said this, but and I hope that at one point you will have this topic, this discussion, this topic more than once, because it certainly is worth having more than one discussion. 2 hours is not enough, I think. So just wanted to congratulate you again for choosing such a fabulous topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ginny. Sorry, Kay put her hand down. I was looking forward to what she had to say, but Jeff, why don't you go next?
Hey, everyone. Well, Ginny said what part of what I was going to say as well. So, I mean, I personally and professionally have been engaged with folks in similar conversations for the last several decades here. And what I would first say about this one is I just have huge respect and regard for each of you, and I hope you won't mind I call it out, but you know, for Will and Jyoti and Xana and I can't remember. Let's see. Oh, and they were sort of engaged in a very authentic and very generous and thoughtful conversation. And I can tell you from personal experience, to achieve those things or to hold those things in a conversation as difficult as this one is an uncommon thing in the world. And so, first of all, let's just appreciate the quality and the courage and the compassion and the authenticity that's been here, you know, tonight. And Garrett, I think I've said this to you before, but you know, there's a theory of leadership that the leader of a group helps to establish and hold a container in which difficult conversations can be held, and everyone holds on to being true and supportive and stay within the norms that actually hold that container, whether it's a marriage or a business or a sports team or the military or whatever. And Garrett, you've done just a masterful job of trying to keep holding the container that then we all, you know, seek to relate within. And at its core, one of the things that this subject is about really is relationships. And I'd just like to offer that I found very useful in conversations like this to distinguish between 4 different kinds of relationships here. And we've all been kind of going back and forth between them, you know, without kind of seeing them in for what they are. So, you know, there is the interpersonal relationship, and that is one. And, you know, whether we're talking about generalizations or stereotypes or race or whatever it is, there's the interpersonal relationship between, you know, a few people, 2, 3, whatever is, you know, that relationship. There's the intrapersonal relationship, you know, there's the whole subject of, which is very, very difficult and very, you know, sad in a way, that where negative stereotypes about race, for example, are internalized, and just the struggle that people have with that. And so there's the intrapersonal, there's the interpersonal, there's the systemic, where racism and sexism and all this shows up. A friend of mine who used to facilitate this just called them the isms. There's a systemic nature to it, and it does happen even within different systems. You know, it might be different in banking than it is, for example, you know, in construction. You know, or it might be, you know, there's in tech or in government. There's different kind of stories, you know, sort of stereotypes that are being told, and policies that are being enacted with regard to systems and institutions. And then there's what's referred to as structural, which is kind of the overall culture of a large group. And the stories that are told, and the beliefs that are there, and the images that are there, and the history that's there, and even the desired future. So this intrapersonal, interpersonal, systemic, and structural orientation to subjects like racism and sexism becomes sort of a useful way to think about it, and even to talk about it. And obviously, there's so much more to say, but I'll stop there. Thanks for letting me share all those things. But this has been actually a remarkable conversation, and I just want to appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate your comments. And with that said, I want to let Brian kind of be the last person tonight, because I do need to close out. I've been up since about 4 this morning, so it's been a long day. But I'm going to let Brian go, and then we'll close out for the evening. I'll close things out for the evening after that.
A couple of vignettes. Many years ago, my father and I and my younger sister picked up a man at a supermarket who wanted to ride home. Well, the man was black. My sister was maybe 4 or 5. We're driving to his house, and my sister said, "Are you chocolate?" to the black man. The black man got a kick out of it. He laughed, at least. So kids learn, they copy, they generalize. So you got to start early. Another incident, one of my brothers and a couple of my other brothers and sisters are in a car driving down the street, and there were a bunch of black kids on the post office. He said, "Hey, Dad, there's a bunch of," fill in the blank. And of course, all of us were shocked. He was maybe 7 or 8. Again, the point is we're geared toward differentiating, determining. White kids see black kids, "Hey, Mom, he's black." And black kids say I remember walking down in a black neighborhood, and a little kid yelled, "Hey, Mom, there's a white man walking down the street." Wow. So we got to start early. Doesn't really go against anything anybody said, but we're pattern matchers, copiers. You know what I mean? So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry, I can't multitask, so I had to type something real quick. So I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, for the really polite and thoughtful conversation. I know, David, I apologize. I'm not going to be able to I'm not going to be able to stay up. So I want to thank everyone for the polite, thoughtful conversation, for the diverse opinions, and for people being heartfelt and sort of sharing their perspectives and being vulnerable. Like, a lot of you, there's a lot of demonization of different opinions, as Will talked about. There's a lot of sort of negative feelings towards people who are for and against racism. And so you have a very diverse set of perspectives going on right now, and they're very high intensity. And so I want to just applaud everybody for staying so polite, and just sharing those honestly heartfelt opinions, and being open to hearing everybody else's perspectives and listening with an open mind. That's a core part of the 5 intentions. And so just want to thank you all for that. And we will do this again because I thought it was very successful. And I do think it would be fun to do as a panel event, like Kay suggested. So Kay, definitely reach out to me. I left my email. If anyone else wants to be on the panel, feel free to reach out to me. And we'll have sort of back and forth between panelists. And I'd really like to use that to dig in deep to people's perceptions of experiences, around when they were stereotyped or in minority sort of situations. I can tell about when I went to a movie called Amistad, thinking that it was a Spanish flick about friends, because Amistad means friendship in Spanish. And yeah, that was not what it was about. And I was the only white person in the theater, along with my girlfriend at the time, who was, very dark skinned. And so, but anyway, hope everybody has a great night. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you all at next week's event. Oh, let me quickly tell you guys what's coming up next. Hopefully they're posted, but if they're not, they will be shortly. Next week, we're going to be talking about another divisive issue, which is who is right, Democrats or Republicans. So a little bit of US politics, but we'll actually cover global politics. I did it tongue in cheek. You guys probably know me well enough to know that. And I'm an independent, so I don't think anyone is right, but we're going to go topic by topic and issue by issue. Kate, did you want to say something about that?
No, I'm laughing because you know how it's going to turn out.
We'll see. What I want to do is I want to take a vote on what topics we're going to cover, and we're going to go topic by topic. What I want to do is get people out of their bubble of Democrat versus Republican. And so I'm intentionally trying to get people who are staunch Democrats and staunch Republicans, but to get them to think from a topic by topic perspective rather than a party lines perspective. And so that'll be, I'm giving you guys the secret to my, my effort there. Hopefully that doesn't spoil the surprise. But then the next one is between self-confidence and egotism. How do you distinguish between a self-confident person versus an egotistical person, which I find a very interesting topic. I think it's often confused. The next one will be same life and post-life karma. Are they real or not? And then the next one after that will be globalism. What is it, and is it good or bad? So again, not veering away from controversial subjects. We like to delve into them and talk about them politely. So please invite a friend or a couple friends and come to the next couple of events. Would love to continue this in the online community. Oh my God, I didn't post any of our I totally was neglectful, and Michael, I'm gonna have to ask you if you can post the things in the future, because the links to the online community and stuff, I'm gonna post those really quick so that people can have them. The links, just get a quick copy and paste of these links for the FTI. It's our YouTube channel, the online community, and a bunch of other stuff. So let me make sure that I do have your info, Jody.
Garrett, thank you so much. This was very brave of you.
May I say something, Garrett?
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, if you found this stimulating, you will really find the FTI stimulating. Our Sunday meetings are very, very, they provoke a lot of thought and a lot of feeling and a lot of friendship.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Michael and Charles are both members and come to our Sunday events. So would love to have more. There's a little more information about membership and the benefits of membership. Right now, there's no fee to be a member of the FTI. Try copying that set of links, and you'll see all of the different ways to get involved in the FTI more. So we would love to have more people more engaged. We always want to create meaningful relationships, which is what we do in the members section. And facilitate meaningful communication, which we do both here and in the members events. So thanks a lot again, everybody, and hope you all have a great night. And I'm going to have to apologize to my daughter because I told her I'd be with her 10 minutes ago. So I got to put them to sleep. So take care, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.